to the weekend's football semi-finals in the women's football and the men's football, and delighted to say that Louise Galvin is with us. Good morning, Louise.
Morning, Owen. How's things?
Very well, thanks. So let's kick things off with Mayo against Tipp. It is on Sunday. It is the biggest chance we have this weekend of an upset. Stephen Rochford this week has said that Tipperary have an over-dependence on Sweeney and Quinlivan up front. Is stopping those two men what the chances of an upset will boil down to on Sunday?
Yeah, I think if you look back at the scoring charts for the last two games, they've certainly been the primary score getters for Tipp. So it is hugely important for Tipp, if they're going to get a win, that they get a little bit more of a contribution from play from the likes of the Kennedys. Brian Fox, I know he came along and scored a massive score against Limerick in that Munster semi-final. But it's hugely important that they're getting a little bit of help, because there's no way Mayo are going to let Quinlivan and Sweeney completely dictate this game and Tipp come on out the other side of a win. Having said that, it is up to Mayo to try and stop them as well, because they're two incredible footballers. They're enjoying their football. We've seen the Munster final how even the little smiles after the game or after the point kicking of Quinlivan, and saw Sweeney after the game. I thought it was one of the most composed interviews of a captain, considering he just captained his team to winning a provincial final for the first time in 85 years, and the whole emotion of Bloody Sunday and that. That was a wonderfully composed interview. So it just shows these guys, they're pretty special footballers, but absolutely, on one hand, Mayo need to stop them. On the other hand, Tipp need to look at giving them a bit more support on the scoring chart, certainly.
That's the thing about their temperament. It does seem that these are the type of players who aren't going to be fazed by the fact that they were in an All-Ireland semi-final. I know that the lack of a crowd will probably take that out of it anyway, but the sense of occasion doesn't seem like it's going to get under the skin of these players.
Yeah, and the lack of crowd is an interesting one, Owen, because I actually see James Horan mentioned this week that he thinks that'll suit Mayo as well. So it seems out of all the teams probably this weekend, Dublin are probably the only ones that are not bothered by a crowd being there or not. And it's something Kate Kirby's well-renowned sports psychologist, she mentioned this week that it could be one of the reasons why this is like the year of the upset for Gaelic games, and even, you know, someone like Waterford, a county in hurling, who get into an All-Ireland hurling final, where again, the crowd, the support they'd have would normally be going mad. Even the whole lockdown, lack of flags, lack of, you know, press nights, I think it's suiting these underdog teams. So certainly with Tipp, I think they're a bunch of lads. They nearly look like they enjoy playing ball. They kind of play to the standard they're at. There's a lot of talking about them obviously being Division 3 team, but again, they stepped up to the plate when they were playing Cork on Munster final day. They just seem to be kind of like an old school team, where maybe that long 11-month season, 10-month intercount season doesn't maybe particularly suit them to keep their eye on the ball, but this shorter 7-8 week season is actually the type of structure that suits them a lot better, because they certainly have the footballers, they have the talent. We've seen them, a lot of these guys win a minor All-Irelands or minor All-Ireland in 2011 under David Power. There's just a lot going right for them at the moment.
That point that James Horan is making about performance anxiety, like, that is something that we've seen replicated, as you mentioned there, the underdog, in a multitude of sports. Like the crazy results we saw at the start of this season in the Premier League probably is down to a lot to do with the fact that there was no crowds in these stadiums. And like, do you subscribe to the school of thought that Mayo definitely were affected over the last few years, especially in 16 and 17, by a full Croke Park, the sense in the stadium that, hold on a minute, we're actually going to beat Dublin, and that kind of got under them a little bit, and it did hold them back. Do you feel that that's out of the picture now if they do manage to get over the line this weekend?
Yeah, it's something I didn't think coming into this game would affect Mayo or would be a positive for Mayo as well as Tipperary. It was only James Horan's comments that kind of highlighted that, and he nearly described the almost sense of a groan of anxiety when Andy Moran, I think, scored a goal against Dublin, which, you know, is incredible. I think normally that's an opportunity for your supporters to get behind you, but it was nearly a sense of, here we go again, we have this false sense of hope. Which, look, I don't know. I mean, if that's a bit of performance anxiety for the coach as well. It's a difficult one. I don't think it even just comes down to the game, the crowd. I think it's the whole society that we're living in at the moment, because even if you took the crowd out of it, but we were normally out socialising, meeting people, you know, crowds outside training, press nights, I think all that has been taken away. And that's what's helping the underdogs. It's not just even the game day itself. But yeah,
there's no hype, Louise. Like, it's a weird one, isn't there?
Yeah, it is strange, and it is disappointing, because when you look back at it, like, let's say these guys, the Tipp guys, the Cam guys, if they don't progress beyond the semi-final, and if they don't reach an All-Ireland semi-final again for another number of years, the positive memories they would have had would have been the build-up to the game, because the game itself might not, if it does end in defeat, might not, obviously won't hold those positive memories, but they'll have the build-up, the excitement, the chatting to the club men, the family, all those different things that they're not having now. But at the same time, it might be something that actually helps them get over the line and help them prepare for an All-Ireland final, which is way more important at the end of the day. I know as a competitive athlete, I prefer to maximise my chance of getting into the final or getting that win rather than enjoy the build-up and, having a close defeat.
You assume, Louise, it's going to be a more competitive game than the match over on the other side, obviously. But at the same time, if you look at what Mayo have done so far, right, beating Leitrim, beating the bang average on the day, Roscommon, and then obviously Galway by a point. Are we talking Mayo up too much?
I think there's still a lot of question marks over this Mayo team. What's going right from the moment is, I suppose, the form of players like Cillian O'Connor, Paddy Durkin, who are just super, super footballers and have performed on the big stage, and you can put your house in them that they're going to put in a performance again as well on Sunday. But when you look at the 21 players I think they used against Dublin last year, 9 are starting this weekend. So they have a lot of unproven players at this level as well. Now, having said that, that could be a sign of they've looked at their county championship and they're going, look, we're picking on form, we're blending a bit of youth and experience. And again, in a shortened championship, maybe that's form is a bit more important than previous years where experience building up to semi-final, the whole pressure that goes with that, maybe a bit of experience can trump a young form player. So maybe it's a smarter decision. But yeah, there's a lot of players that are still unproven at this level. At the same time, I mean, you can't be but excited at the sight of an Owen McLaughlin and Oisin Gallen rushing out of defence. Like the speed endurance of these guys and the incessant, I suppose, want and desire of them to attack at all times mean that Tipperary, they can't just sit back either. They really need to go and make sure the ball is being stuck down the other end of the field. I think one way they might do that is to obviously go a bit long on their kickouts, because I think there was a stat in the Times this week about the amount of turnovers that Mayo are getting, and it's actually starting with their full forward line. Their full forward line have more turnovers than any other line. So if Tipp are going to go short, which they haven't done, I mean, they've a lot of ball winners around the middle of the field, ably assisted obviously by Colin O'Riordan coming in and top of Casey and O'Brien. I think they'll look to go long, because at least then if they turn over the ball, if they win the midfield battle, turn over the ball a little bit further up into the lines, they can get a little bit of protection back to try and stem the tide of these onrushing Mayo defenders who just want to attack at pace.
That piece by Eamon Donoghue is definitely worth digging out, illustrating how Mayo are almost like Liverpool in the sense that their attackers are so dangerous without the ball that they turn you over and it's a score, obviously. The thing, though, is that this kind of plays into a Tipperary advantage, that if there's one team still alive in the championship who perhaps are actually better going long from their kick-out, it is Tipperary. In that middle third, in midfield in particular, they're very strong. Yeah,
absolutely, and I think they more than capably beat Cork in that area of the field as well. And then automatically that gives you your supply to your marquee inside forwards. So certainly that might influence how Mayo play the game, because if you have Conor Loftus, who by all accounts only started playing midfield for Crossmolina this year in the club championship, if you have Conor Loftus and he's struggling there along with Matthew Ann, who's a brilliant midfielder, then you're starting to bring out Aidan O'Shea, which suddenly might change the I suppose the point of their attack and the whole they've obviously had him in full forward all year. So are you now taking away from what you're working on just to make sure you secure primary possession against a very strong midfield for Tipperary? So there's a lot to play out. I mean, if they are struggling to win that ball, I mean, it's either you bring in a Tom Parsons or a Seamus O'Shea to try and win that midfield ball, or you start to pull out an Aidan O'Shea, which obviously it all has a knock-on effect somewhere else up the field. Having said that, if Mayo do get a bit of a stranglehold in this game, if they do start creating those turnovers, certainly around the middle third, and they just start to bomb forward, then it's going to be dangerous for Tipperary to try and stem that tide, because they probably have a bit more of a spread of scoring than Tipp do, relying on the likes of Sweeney and Quinlivan.
On the point of the turnovers, Louise, Stephen Rochford was saying to the Examiner today that Mayo have been doing some basketball work, and obviously you've one of the many sports that you played to an incredibly high level yourself, so you know a thing or two about that. But he's talking about like shutting them down that way and obviously turning them up blind alleys and stuff like that. It's something that I'm sure Tipp will be conscious of, but how do you plan or how do you plot to get around a press like that, even though you might be expecting it?
Yeah, like I think it's obviously not the first team not the first county to turn to basketball or another sport, which is a sign of just constantly looking for those extra 1 or 2 percentages. But yeah, look, you're trying to get off the tram lines. I mean, and I think Dublin are the primary example of this. Like, they'll try and run you down the tram line and make it look like you have an avenue in front of you and use the sideline as an extra defender. And you could run 40, 50 yards, but actually you're in no better position. So I think try and get off the tram lines, try and get into the middle of the field, try and give yourself 2 sides of attacks is really important. And then angles is the other way that I suppose a lot of basketball teams will defend. They'll try and use like a 3-point system where a defender always has an eye on the ball and an eye on that you're always in a triangle between the player you're marking and where the ball is. So it's like the best way to, I suppose, attack that is get in off the tram lines, get yourself to have 2 sides of attack, and then just try and move the ball as much as possible. So the ball is the focal point of the attack. If you don't want to carry the ball 40, 50 yards because it might look like you're making advancements, but actually you're cutting off your opportunity. And I think that's another reason why maybe Aidan O'Shea being inside can be a positive thing for Mayo, because he's a phenomenal footballer. But I think for years, Aidan carried the ball and actually slowed down the Mayo attack because he'd be so strong at it. He became a focal point for opposition defenders to try and come and have a hop off him. Yeah, he might get past 2 or 3 players, but actually I think he was just slowing down the attack and allowing the rest of the defence to go back and cut off options. And if he didn't get a free in possession, oftentimes it was a case of recycling and starting their attack again. So you just need to keep the ball moving. I think one player, unless it's opened up in front of you, one player carrying, unless it's an incredible speed at a Jack McCaffrey or a Paddy Durkin, actually getting ahead of players. If you're on a tram line and you're just carrying the ball along, or you're just in the middle of the field but hopping off players, 2 or 3 players, and slowing the game down, it's actually not that advantageous for your team the way other teams are defending these days.
You ultimately think of Mayo?
You would expect it, but I do think it's going to be closer than the other semi-final. And I think, again, how matchups are important. So, like, whether it's Chris Barrett picking up Conor Sweeney, maybe a bit of a height advantage there. Where Quinlivan will go, will he drift in and out a little bit? The matchups are going to be hugely important, particularly for those 2 players. But, you know, if it's, again, coming out of that third quarter, it's a bit of a basketball analogy, but that's the way we have with the water breaks. If Tipp are thereabouts, God, I certainly wouldn't be writing them off.
No, it should be a cracker. The other one then, Dublin against Cavan tomorrow night in Croke Park, Louise. One of the questions I would have about this Dublin team is how on earth they managed to keep bringing such a high level of performance given their favourites tag. How it just seems so effortless for them to reach an unbelievably high level every single time of asking. There isn't a blemish on the record every time they come out and they show up against, whether it's Meath, whether it's any other team in Leinster, whether it's a quarter-finalist that comes from Ulster, or in this year, a semi-finalist that's coming from Ulster. Can you pin down why that is?
They're just super impressive. But what they seem to have created is this incredible culture of, number one, it's the team. It's not about who scores, it's about the team getting over the line. So you'll see so many of their goals, like it's just someone coming across and they could shoot, they'll just lay it off, hand pass, and Dean Rock or whoever will slip it in. Within that then, though, they have incredible competition for places, but that competition isn't based off you're going to come off the bench and score 1-2 even as an inside forward. Whatever way they've done their analysis, whatever way they have it, they have players itching to get on the field to play, but the goals are very much team goal orientated, whether you're a cornerback or a corner forward. And that's what I always think about Dublin. They're not selfish. They've clutch players who know, yeah, I'm a score getter. I'm gonna go and put my head down and go for goal. The likes of Kevin McManaman over the years coming on, he knows his role is bomb ahead. But it's always with a team focus and a team outlook. They don't have selfish players. So whatever, however they have created that culture, whether it started even before Jim Gavin or when he first came in, I think that's the most important thing, because it keeps the competition within the squad and it keeps everyone focused on the same goal. Like, guys aren't coming on just to score, because that's not going to be enough, or just to stop their man. That's not going to be enough to keep them even within the 26 probably for the next day. It's so team oriented. And again, since the Leinster final, we've barely heard a word out of camp. Like, they just do all their talking on the field. It's so boring nearly how effortlessly professional they are. You could not dig up a bit of dirt. You couldn't dig up, a bit of a comment saying, oh, this guy said this here now, can we take an angle on that? They're just such consummate professionals. And then they have a few Rolls Royce of footballers that, they're generationally, they're just superb. Like the likes of Brian Fenton, you could just watch them all day gliding all over the field. Stephen Cluxton, again, like meet press up, and then he just picks out Conor Callan for a few of those kickouts down the centre of the field. It's just boring, isn't it? But also, it's so admirable. It's so admirable.
I'd be keen to get your take on, if you were Dessie Farrell, what sort of team you'd pick this weekend. We might just focus on the forwards this morning. The 6 forwards they started against Meath were Scully, Kilkenny, Bugler, Small, that's Paddy Small obviously, Conor Callaghan and Dean Rock. Mannion, Costello, Howard came off the bench. Are you sticking with the same that went against Meath? As you say, there's a very specific plan they have for every team they come up against, and it's not necessarily just squad depth or a pecking order. It's a very specific 6 that they always pick. Are you sticking with that, or do Mannion, Costello, Howard, does one or a couple of those 3 come in?
But I'm not sure Costello will be rewarded for having to put their delegates and their administrators through a CCC or whatever it is. So I'm not sure he's going to be rewarded for that. But of all of those, I actually think that Howard probably might have the biggest, I suppose, push for a starting spot, purely because, again, Cavan are particularly strong around that kind of middle 8. And I know, again, Owen, you mentioned like the 6 forwards, but as we know, it's so not a 6 forwards, 6 backs game. So it completely depends on what way. Like, if you have Scully has become, he's almost become like, he came slightly after Howard, but actually has become that Howard role, or that typical almost Paul Flynn role of like the modern day half forward who's tracking back, coming forward, everything going through them, and gets on the odd score at the end of the pitch as well. But I think because of Howard, like, he's an incredible aerial leap. He actually played a lot really in midfield, I feel, last year, particularly in that final and final replay. I think if they're struggling to win primary possession around that middle half, and I mean struggling in Dublin terms, which usually isn't a massive struggle either, you could see Brian Howard maybe staking a claim to push to start maybe ahead of Lahif or ahead of a Bugler, if they're thinking that they need a bit more size rather than pure attacking threat. Having said that, like you say, it's not that Bugler has done anything wrong. If he was to be dropped, it's a horses for courses sort of a situation.
Is there, if you talk about this in a realistic sense, what is the best outcome for Cavan this weekend in your view? Probably if they can stay within 5 or 6 points. I think that'd be huge for them. Having said that, look, they came in being told if they stay within 5 or 6 points of Donegal, that it wouldn't be a bad outcome either. And like Mickey Graham, he obviously has the bit of a Midas touch of having these kind of underdog teams and just instilling such incredible belief for them. The other thing is, if they go behind, they're not going to drop the heads out of Meath or maybe some of the other teams that are used to playing Dublin. And they haven't played Dublin in so long to have that sense of, we're 5 or 6 points behind now. It's done. It's dead in the water. They might have seen it, obviously, with other squads, but they're a sort of team that dig in. So I don't see, if they do tend to go down early in the game, I don't see it necessarily turning into game over, 10, 12, 15-point drubbing. I think they'll stick with it because they're incredibly dogged. But it is very difficult to see where they're going to win this game. At the same time, I keep telling myself, sometime this Dublin team are going to lose. They're going to have to lose. And maybe an All-Ireland semi-final in the current structure without a quarter-final is the place it's going to happen, because I don't think anyone in Leinster has the belief or the players to topple them. And I think if you get them in an All-Ireland final stage,
they're just so incredibly focused that if you are going to catch them on the hop or catch them on one of those days where just a few key players aren't up to scratch, aren't up to song, maybe they're like, I do think Dublin's rear guard aren't as strong as their middle third and their forwards. And we've seen last year, obviously, the likes of Johnny Cooper can get him into a bit of trouble with ref. Like if you can get something, a black card early, I see the likes of John Small maybe going to Gerald McKiernan if one or two of them pick up a bit of a black card. The fact that that's now more a sin bin rather than a replacement might give Cavan a little bit of a chance. And they're the type of team, like they've suffered 2 black cards in that Ulster final, contentious enough ones, and they still dug it out. So if we can get, Brian Fenton off guard, off song, Kieran Kilkenny pulling a few shots wide, maybe black carded too, maybe then it could be Cavan's day, because if it's going to happen, I think it's going to be semi-final.
Yeah.
Or out of Leinster, but before a final.
Yeah, it's a good shout. It's a good shout. It'll be, I think what we're all hoping for is maybe something that's a single point difference between the teams, which would be a success given everything we've seen in recent months. Let's talk about Cork against Galway. It's a 1/2 throw-in on Sunday. The big theme around this has been the moving of the fixture from the Gaelic grounds in Limerick to Parnell Park because of the Limerick hurlers training in the Gaelic grounds. What's your take on that whole situation?
My first take on is that I hate this with ladies sports. The first thing we talk about is something nothing to do with the game. And Jeannie Mac, when that day ends, I'll be a happy woman. But seeing as you asked me about it anyway, and you're right, if you ask most people, most of the general sports followers, this is what they'll know about that game.
Yeah.
Look, Limerick own the ground. This is, if you go back to the original, the original problems, ladies sport, camogie, ladies football, we don't own grounds, so we're always relying on, I suppose, the generosity of the GA. And Limerick, they said, they clearly stated, I mean, who are we to come up against a John Kiley and say, no, we actually want that ground. Look, they're doing what they feel they need to do. And then there's a question about lights, which meant it went to Dublin. But it does seem a bit ridiculous that there wasn't another way of solving this than bringing Galway and Cork, who would have a lot of players come from Bantry and Skibben, these places, all the way up to Parnell Park, which means they're then in the middle of a pandemic coming the night before because it's a 1/2 throw-in. It is a little bit ridiculous, but this is part of the problem. I see last night there's been talk of the WGPA and the GPA joining up forces, and it might lead to some of these issues not arising, hopefully, in the future. But to get onto the game itself, I think going to be a good game. We saw a cracker against Dublin Armagh. I hope you saw it last weekend. It was a brilliant game of football. I hope this weekend will live up to it as well. I think Galway have not hit the heights of probably their All-Ireland semi-final last year was when they last put in a particularly good performance. I think the final last year was a bit of a disaster, notwithstanding the weather conditions, and Galway didn't particularly perform either, which was a pity because Dublin didn't perform, and it was definitely there for the taking. But they have won their 2 group games just by a point, very tight group with Monaghan and Tipperary, and in both those games they were ahead and let the squad back into it. Contrast that with Cork hadn't had any games before they played a Kerry team who were high in confidence after beating Cavan, played them down in 3. And a very professional performance. Again, they get ahead and then they just close the game out. What Cork have at the moment as well is an incredible goal getter in Saoirse Noonan, who also ended up playing with Cork City and called into the women's national squad over the course of the last few months. And they just have an incredible ability to grind out these results. They still have a lot of links to kind of to very dominant squads, particularly the likes of Roisin Phelan and the Sullivan sisters. So unless Galway can really discover a little bit of form, I think this is going to be a Cork win.
The last meeting in Championship was an absolute mauling in favour of Cork. 2017, they scored 6 goals against Galway in that particular fixture. How much have Galway come on in the intervening 3 years, and are they a proper All-Ireland contender in your view, or is it very hard to look every single year past Cork and Dublin at this point?
Yeah, I think even in 2017 we were coming really to the... Cork were in a slight transition stage, but they were still in a strong position than they probably have been the last 2 years. think with Galway, what happened last year, they got to the All-Ireland semi-final. They played Mayo, who they play obviously annually, and they've a real rival and battle with them, and they come out on top. But I think when they then come to the likes of playing at Dublin and a Cork, they're probably just a little bit off the mark, because that All-Ireland final last year was there for the taking. It was a difficult game, difficult conditions, but neither team, it was such a disappointment, because I think ladies football has come on leaps and bounds, and some of the skill level and the conditioning is off the charts, and it wasn't really reflected in the All-Ireland final last year. So Galway would have been disappointed themselves, the performance, but even, coming into the league games this year, the round robin games, they just haven't hit the same heights. Having said that, they're 60 minutes away from getting back into an All-Ireland final that they feel would have left a lot behind them last year. So I wouldn't write them off. It's difficult this year. I mean, ladies football, they didn't end up finishing the league, and they all just played 2 round-robin games. So again, we're going off a little bit of wondering where teams are at, what form they have. Galway as well are missing Roisin Leonard, who's out injured, who would be a real talismanic forward for them. So on the balance of things, I'd have to go with Cork, because again, seeing them play that game down in Tralee, they still just have that ability to just grind games out if they get their nose ahead. They're just a real kind of professional outfit from that point of view, and I think they've enough stability at the back and firepower up front to trouble Galway. I also think this whole fixture thing, Evie Fitzgerald, I think he'll use it a little bit to add a little bit of fire to his squad. And they'll certainly be eyeing up Dublin that final.
Yeah, he's not a happy man this week. Louise Galvin, great stuff as ever. Thanks a million for taking the call.
Thanks, guys.
Right, it is 29 minutes past 8 on this Friday morning, and it is a massive weekend in the 2020 GAA All-Ireland Senior Football Championships. We're at the semi-final stage, and to celebrate, SuperValu, as part of their Support Where You're From campaign, have given us some great prizes to give away. We want you to dig out your favourite ticket stub, match programme jersey, photo with your hero, any GAA-related item basically you've been dying to tell the country about. Make a 20-second video explaining its significance. Get them into us on any OTB social channel you like, or on WhatsApp to 0879 180 180. We'll choose a winner every Friday during the championship. Each weekly winner lands a €200 voucher for a SuperValu near you, and also the chance to star in SuperValu's Super Fan series, a fly-on-the-wall peek inside the homes of dedicated supporters around the country. SuperValu are proud sponsors of the GAA Football All-Ireland Senior Championships. See youtube.com/SuperValu Ireland for more details.